Sometimes you forget that the whole premise of security controls is that you don't want to get hacked. Because that's everybody is focusing on the paperwork, but they're forgetting that the worst feeling on earth is when you realize that some piece of your product or company has been compromised and attackers have your data. And that feels much worse than putting and writing together some controls or spending money. And you have to explain that to your customers. And that feels horrible as well.
Or for those who haven't ever had, to explain it and haven't had to have lawyers on either side of them when they're looking at every document and every forensic trail imaginable, it's just a nightmare. And
These days, everybody is promising us SOC 2 compliance for $500. AI agents handle everything, just set it and forget it, except, when they hallucinate and there are issues at handoff and you have to pass an audit. So today I'm sitting down with Padraic O'Reilly, co-founder and chief innovation officer of CyberSaint Security. Padraic is a Harvard-trained economist who helped develop an IST cybersecurity framework, and holds a lot of patents in monitoring and security. And he's in the trenches building the next generation of compliance systems. So, Padraic, welcome you to So What About AI Agents, and excited to hear your insights about how compliance is changing.
it's a pleasure to be here, Philippe. It's changing. I've been working in this space for longer than a decade, specifically around automation. There's a lot going on these days. I was at a conference yesterday, and the entire conference was devoted to the exact topic you picked for this. So everyone's talking about it. So it's great to be here.
AI is really good at generating content,
Yes.
and this content, good or bad, looks convincing. So, how has your business changed? Let's start with that.
It's changed a great deal. It's changed significantly. I mean, if you go back 5, 6 years, we were working on control automation projects, which were really they were the precursors of some of the more commoditized versions of, SOC 2 compliance. But we were doing it across other types of frameworks. We were doing it with NIST 853. We were doing it with, bigger telemetry sources, policy compliance sources, things of that nature. So we were doing it more on the enterprise scale. But 5 years ago, not every team was interested in automation. They just wanted to run assessments in system. They wanted to be able to port that information across risk assessments. But about a year or two ago, it became really thematic in most of the conversations we had. How much can we get out of automation? How much can we get out of APIs? How much can we get out of agentic scraping of things? How much control automation can we get out of the box? So it became more and more urgent to see a set of connectors in our system. And we'd been doing it longer than anyone else. So, in a way, we saw of the market shifting towards automation, where it now is. That's all anyone talks about now. So it's been a very interesting journey.
Makes perfect sense. So nowadays they're promising all these quick controls, set it up, do it for you quick with AI. What are some of the benefits versus what are some of the controls, like issues that you see with it?
Yeah. Well, the one use case you're talking about is a fascinating one, which is really some companies that started in the valley, and they had a network already of other startup like companies. And anytime you're going to do business with a startup, even if it's a startup trying to do business with mid-market or a startup trying to do business with enterprise, that startup's going to be asked to show some sort of compliance to something, right? So generally speaking, SOC 2 is what you're asked to show compliance to, because showing compliance to FedRAMP moderate or NIST 853 moderate is too much for a startup. SOC 2 is like maybe 70, 80 requirements, and you have a report. The report is digestible, easily digestible. So it was a perfect use case to commodify, a kind of automation. So plugging in, HR software, plugging in, other kinds of software, and just populating the controls that way. That spread like wildfire because there were so many startups, and that ecosystem was very well funded. So the companies that were doing the early automation around that took off in a sense, like a rocket ship. Because I've been in a startup. We were a startup once. We were 5 people in a room or 3 people in a room. And then we're being asked to be SOC 2 compliant. Well, who's going to do that? Or, one guy's on a call The other guy's coding like mad, and another guy is, going and getting lunch. So, there's no time. So, really kind of took off. Just took off, and it's understandable that it took off. But they never wanted to. They didn't really want to expand. Now they say they want to expand into the enterprise. They say they do, but in order to expand into the enterprise, you've got to be able to do it with other frameworks, with other sources. You've got to be able to do it with like, dense cyber telemetry. And those are the use cases we got shoved into early, which is a different kind of control automation where those concerns you raise around, you know, quality assurance, error rates, agents just making mistakes if you start to chain them. That's where that comes in because enterprise can't make those mistakes. Some ways startups can, if you hand in a SOC 2 that is 20% gibberish, you're still going to have that contract. It's like, it's just not gonna, the lawyers aren't, and they're not going to throw a lot of lawyers at it. But in the enterprise, if you start hallucinating things in the enterprise, the lawyers are going to notice, and you just can't do that. So our approach has been slightly different than those firms, but it's one of the reasons we are sticky in the enterprise is because we take a much more quality assurance type approach to it.
That makes sense. So, how do the agents or the compliance agents differ? Let's say on enterprise level, what are some of the things that when somebody is building an enterprise agent, what are some of the things that you have to consider? You mentioned quality because we know there is like an 18% context drop off between tool calls and agents, and they lose context all the time. So, there must be a lot of tag that you're putting in to make sure, and you're building agents right now
Yeah,
that are
we are.
building those
Yeah.
enterprise.
Big data sources, right? Like take Qualys PC, for example, really, really cool product when it comes to configuration data. And they've done some work relating their policy structure to existing standards, right? So if you get a call out to something like Qualys PC or, AWS or Azure or any of those policy driven on top of architectures. Like, are you doing a thing or not? Is guard duty switched on? Yes, no. That stuff comes in, a structured JSON basically that comes back and you can insert that into controls. You can decide what the status of those controls is. That's the first way to do it. That's what some of those commodity companies are struggling with. They don't have a way necessarily to handle some of that because they took an agentic approach to begin with. For us, agents is more about how to capture that cyber data that isn't as easily structured, right? Because there are a lot of projects and a lot of products and applications out there that don't, in their APIs, that don't structure it. They don't say, "Here's all our settings, here's all our configurations, here's the security settings in our product, and here's how it relates to controls." We do a lot of NLP on the control side, sort of like which policy might relate to which control action. But we QA that pretty hard. But this unstructured data, there's still a lot of great cyber data in products that are out there and being used. So that's what we do. But we train, we don't chain the agents really. And they're not similar agents. They're each doing a different thing, right? So the visual agent is really just taking screenshots. And then there's extraction. So extraction is what can we pull out of the screenshot in terms of in terms of configuration data. Then you might chain a call to an LLM but that LLM's already been told, look, this is a very narrow field you have to work with. We're looking for these controls, and we want to understand that data that you were able to extract in terms of these controls. And we do that over and over again so that the agent, it really understands, the screenshot, the extraction, and then the LLM. So we're always looking at that data to see, if they're hallucinating, because we don't want them to hallucinate, obviously.
Yeah, it's hard. Hallucinations are a big problem, and consistency is a big problem because they will make a mistake 1% of the time. And in
Yes,
case of when you are creating those large scale compliance certifications or paperwork or documentation, you can't have that. 1% is still a problem, and this will lead to more problems downstream.
absolutely.
Well, what are some of the like concrete things that you've put in place? Like you mentioned you keep retrying. So how do you reconsolidate these answers, or and how does that get put together? Is there a human in the loop maybe?
Yeah, there are humans in the loop still on most of the agentic stuff. We don't check every job, but one of the things that when you talk to research scientists about hallucination, there's one really cool way to kind of reduce hallucination. You tell it not to hallucinate. It's crazy, but you have to tell it don't hallucinate. So there are ways you can engineer the prompts so that you constrain it as much as possible to the information. You tell it to go back and check its work.
Mm.
So there are tricks that you do, and even research scientists and the hyperscalers will say it. Make sure you tell it not to go find something. And if it doesn't know the answer, if it doesn't know, don't make something up. If you don't know, don't make something up. If it doesn't know, don't make something up. That's where generally, that's where it gets into trouble. If it doesn't have an answer, it makes one up.
That makes a lot of sense. We do the same thing. Just tell it, check your work, don't hallucinate, double check. That's
Yeah.
all. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I made it up.
It sounds mundane, but it's QA, and those are some of just the little adjustments that can work. And in AI, little adjustments are everything, right? That's how you basically make an LLM. You're tuning it constantly.
So, what is agentic compliance going to look like? What are the agentic controls? Because nowadays, companies on enterprise and every level, they are deploying LLMs and they're deploying a lot of these systems. What does the agentic compliance look like? What controls must be in place there to make sure that agent is like under some sort of a standard?
Yeah. Oh my God, that come up yesterday at this conference. There were lawyers just they kept putting us in groups, and half of the people in groups were lawyers from Fortune 200 companies, and they were just shaking their heads about the problem that you just described. I because what do you do? You're getting changes every day to the code. You're getting the surface is expanding daily. The problem is exponential now, and you've got pressures to adopt, right? So, like, everyone wants to adopt AI across the organization, but you don't have perfect visibility into what everything is doing, and then you have vendors who are putting AI in, and there are no contracts yet, really, to make sure that the AI they're putting in, there's third, fourth, and fifth party stuff that, nobody knows what to do about. So that's still really unclear, what to do about it, because adoption is happening. It's rapid, but if you look at the standards that are out there, like the NIST AI RMF or the UAI Act, it's not all agent based or agent driven. So I think agentic compliance around the agents you're using is still an area that's requires a lot of work and contract work as well.
Yeah, on one end, agents enable us to have continuous compliance, where you can have monitoring agents that will monitor everything and report. And you can have pen testing agents that could continuously try and hack your site. The problem is it's generating a ton of data that somebody would need to review. And ultimately, are we going to have AI lawyers and AI compliant, agentic, lawyers and agentic compliance people reviewing that data and then reporting to the human ones? How do you see it? Like theoretically?
Theoretically, as I was sitting there yesterday, theoretically, I was thinking, there's a lot of talk about that latter point you just made, which is, what do we do with the data? Do we save it? Because the people in the financial institutions were like, we have all these requirements to save it for 5 or 7 years. Me as a theorist and as someone who builds things that look forward a little bit, I'm like, why do you want to save that? I'm like, you got to change the rule on that, because we're gonna pile up a lot of just noise. We might use the information in the moment, but why do we need to persist it? Do we really need an audit trail for every little decision we're making on these things? So theoretically, I don't. I see so much data fly past me, and I work with so much data that I'm like, did something. Let's look at the deltas. Let's not, we might have a way to save it for legal or forensic purposes, but maybe that's a different problem. So it's going to pile up. I think that still has to be hammered out, ironed out. But to me, a lot of it is you use it in the moment, for a very important purpose, which is to understand your risk exposure, to understand your compliance. But do you save everything or do you just save the deltas?
Imagine somebody's job at some point is going to be reading through AI slop,
Yeah.
and that's your whole job. You have to read this.
Seems like we're doing that anyway now. When we open our phones up, it's like, to what extent do we want to be taken over by nonsense, right? Yeah.
Right, because and imagine it starts to argue with itself because if you have this recursive AI loops and it's like, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, I think I made a mistake. Oh yeah, maybe I'm, and then you have to read the thinking loop too. And first of all, then you're going to be saving a lot of data, and where are we going to store all of it? And the second is like, why do you need its like entire thinking process stored, or do we?
It's the lawyers. I mean, yet again, it's the lawyers, and they're in a unique position around all of this at the moment, right? Because it's going to come down to what the judgments look like. And they were all saying yesterday, and I think they're right, that what we see out of California around lawsuits on, agentic use, liability around that structure has yet to arrive. How much of it do we save? What do we need to have there for, reliability, for indemnification? Some of that remains to be determined, I think.
Yeah, I guess so. And that will depend on. So the modern audits are changing as well. Are you seeing auditors also use LLMs to audit things? And how do auditors avoid LLMs from hallucinating based on what they read? Like, because I can understand there is two sides to this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, that's where I'm most optimistic. That's where we've made
Mm,
in the last year, where we've made, to my eyes, real significant progress. Like the gee whiz, oh my goodness factor really comes into play. So, for example, with one of our partners, IBM, we have now in system the ability to say create a questionnaire
mm,
for maybe a supplier, right? And then we have the ability to upload previous existing documents. They don't even have to be on that standard. They could be on another standard. They could be on another set of questions, even. And then very specifically train LLM inside Watson that will parse everything and translate it immediately into the new set of questions. And that is such a huge, because in cyber, that part of the practice, right, where you go and you do an assessment and you sit everyone down and you go through the existing documentation and you call people, you call up IT, you ask about, implementations, you ask about policy, you ask about procedure. That stuff in the old days, and that's when we started the company, both George and I were assessors, essentially. And we'd go out, our first customers, and we do these week-long, 2-week, 3-week-long engagements. And that's what the SOC 2 automation is about too. It's like, do you want 6 weeks of strangers coming into the office and going through every line item with you, or do you want, some automation? That one area has saved an amazing amount of time. The LLM will grind for 10 minutes on the new questionnaires and populate it with the structured data from the old questionnaire, and huge time savings there. A huge ability to do more volume. Very optimistic about that. And the error rates are not significant on that because it's such a narrowly constrained problem. It's, as much needle in the haystack. It's sort of, stay inside this questionnaire when you answer it. Don't go far afield. And that's the real danger with LLMs is they go far afield. They'll go out and grab, you know, something off Wikipedia, right? Or just, you know, anything that's in their training data. But if you constrain it, because the context length are good, if you constrain it to the documents that you're giving it and the questions you're giving it, really, really powerful results there.
right. And you limit the context of your LLMs to your own internal data sets, right? You have like some proprietary data that you're using to power. Is it like, so you have like SLMs? So you self-hosting your LLMs and you power them with your knowledge, or are you using something off the shelf?
No, we use both. We use off the shelf, but we also build our own, and we constrain LLMs in a few different ways. We have a GNN structure for cyber data, so that it's all sort of connected in the GNN that runs on top Torch. So there's an inference layer there. But then when you have an LLM interact, you don't send it out to you know to the Wild West to answer a question. You tell it to stay inside the GNN, which is it's a really large structure, but all of the causal relationships are inside the GNN, right? So like the threat data is related to the TTPs, is related to the loss events data, which is related to the control data. It's all in there. So you keep it constrained inside the GNN. So it doesn't have to go out and reinvent the wheel every time.
That makes a lot of sense. So what are some of the results you've seen with this? So I understand you were able to reduce like your manual effort by up to 70%. What stays manual? Where do you still believe human in the loops will remain? Like,
Yeah. I mean, I think there's always going to be, a role for people. I never got into this business to, go around and say, "Hey, I'm here to replace you." That's not. It's not a very fun message to bring into rooms of people you've just met. Meet your obsolescence. I'm the face of your obsolescence. That's not like my thing. I was always more about what do you struggle with and how can we make that quicker, and free you up to do the really essential stuff, right? And the important essential stuff. So there are some things you can't automate. For example, in cyber, like, do you guys put locks on the gate outside the server farm? Who plugs in or unplugs that equipment? Do you have a closet for that thing? Do you use physical badges? Do you have lights on the perimeter? There are whole families of cyber controls that would be really tough to automate. And then people, when they get really fruity, they say things like, "Oh yeah, but in theory, there are applications that contain all that data." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, well, we, like, we've automated 60% of a control framework. If you're then going to say, they don't understand maybe marginal return, marginal gains, like getting the last 30% is going to cost 10 times what getting the first 60% cost, right? So physical and environmental stuff, some of the human resource stuff, is not formalized. You know, there's a lot of that. But are you really replacing a human when you say these policies switched on in the cloud for this particular architecture? Yeah, I don't think you're replacing a human. You're helping that human who's in charge of that, do it.
no, this makes perfect sense. Like saying we'll have drones that will, fly over the property and monitor for locks. Yeah, you could technically do it, and you can analyze the visual footage and determine if there is a lock there or not. But like, so you do something called NLP based crosswalking, right? So you map controls to intents, not just keywords. How does that work? And does that also utilize agents in some way? Or are you using that less because Agentic has basically replaced that?
Yeah, I mean, you could use agents to do that. It's just that we've had to build it into bases at scale. So like anytime we get a customer who comes in, we've got hundreds of frameworks that are available for them. Like I woke up this morning and before I was even awake, I had a client asking me, "How do you create a control family for a control?" They're building out a big instantiation for a client halfway across the world, and they're kind of confused. So we have to take controls to me, just to get theoretical for a second. In cyber, controls sit at the middle of everything. In defense, controls sit at the middle of everything. In any industrial pursuit, controls sit at the middle of everything. You might have something like a programmable logic controller, on machines on the shop floor. This is like logic that the machine has to do. And these are the parameters inside which it has to operate, right? It's everywhere. As humans, we're like, I do a thing and I log that I do a thing, so that's part of how we work, and controls for me are that theoretical ground. They're like, how do we do a thing or not do a thing? So could you send out an agent to understand controls? Yeah, but one of the areas I work with LLMs on constantly because I have to create frameworks is I feed them standards. I feed them PDFs and I say, what do you make of this? If I have this structure for a framework and system, so if I have an ID, a control family, a control label, a control description, a description, if I want to decompose it into its individual actions, how would you do it? Well, the LLM screws that up 9 times out of 10. It just it just does. What is it good at? It's good if you could chunk the job. Like if you chunk the job, extract the text that looks like this text or has this heading above it. Extract that for me. It'll do that. It's good at maybe if you give it very narrow parameters on crosswalking, But for us, we have to have all those controls in system. They have to be in a database. We have to embed them, you know, we have to embed them, and then we have to get the dot product. And then we can use some natural language processing to review whether or not mappings make sense. We can do multiple steps of QA to determine, is this the same scope? Are the controls the same scope? Are we talking the same kinds of architectures? Are we talking about identity and access management on this kind of instantiation or that? Are they similar? Are they functionally similar? Are they semantically similar? Yeah. So for us, I wouldn't trust an agent. I would never send an agent out into two control frameworks to make sense of it.
No, this explains it really well. You don't you because it will hallucinate, and it really chokes when you give it too many parameters or where it has too much context. But what must remain uniquely human in compliance and certification and in your space?
Yeah. I think what must remain uniquely human is the ability to tell a story, right?
Mm.
Why do we do this? Why do we do this thing? Why did we have anyone do it when it wasn't AI doing it? Why why were they doing it? And even there we still struggle sometimes. And the reason we struggle is we don't always connect. So and as a human, we can tell a story about what I am doing, who I am, where I come from. And sometimes the audience is like, boo, we don't care, and that's frustrating as a human, right? If you get up on stage and you give a long monologue and the audience is just not feeling it, it's tough. You're like, you have an existential crisis. So you have always at these security conferences now, these moments, right? Where everyone tries to give each other therapy. And it's always a little, depending on your temperament, I find it entertaining. My CEO looks at it and he's like, these idiots are doing it again. Like, why are they doing this to each other? Why is anyone trying to talk to anyone else to begin with? Like, but to me, it's very human. And the human impulse is to tell the story, to have the story understood, to then have a shared understanding. And that with that shared understanding, continue to chart a path forward. And I think yesterday at the conference, there were two entirely divergent states of mind on that. The one is the stories we're telling are all breaking down and we're all just going to hell fast. And the other divergent stream was we're making progress, So I think you have to ground it. Why do we do all this with controls? We do it so that we understand what our posture is, how we defend, and how we go about our daily routines, right? And we also do it so that we can understand where we can do it better. So you have to be able to translate anything an agent or an LLM does into data that other people outside the practice can understand. So you need to be able to say, okay, we're a little weak in access control. We're stronger here on the system and communication side. What does that mean for historical exposures for businesses like us? You have to be able to translate up to that level. You have to be able to understand the business impacts of all this. Because we don't in tech, we don't do all this in a vacuum. We're doing it inside the context of the business. And, strangely, AI can help us there too. In a way, it can hand ourselves back to ourselves because you can always say to an LLM, here's how I think about risk, and here's what's going on across a set of controls, broadly speaking. How can I make a story out of this, And an LLM can actually help you with that. So it can improve communication for people who maybe it has been a struggle for. But for those who were maybe good at communication to begin with, maybe not as much, but that's okay too.
Yeah. Sometimes you forget that the whole premise of security controls is that you don't want to get hacked. Because that's the one everybody is focusing on the paperwork, but they're forgetting that the worst feeling on earth is when you realize that some piece of your product or company has been compromised and attackers have your data. And that feels much worse than putting and writing together some controls or spending money. And you have to explain that to your customers. And that feels horrible as well.
Horrible.
And then you have to explain it to the press.
Horrible. And even going through, you're exactly right. Even going through tabletop exercises where that's happening feels horrible. So, it's like for those who haven't ever had, to explain it, and haven't had to have lawyers on either side of them when they're looking at every document and every forensic trail imaginable. It's just not, it's just a nightmare. And, at this conference yesterday too, and it was really, really good. Budget allocations previous to a breach or an attack, 20 to 30% of what they're asking for. Budget allocations post companies that had an attack, 130% over.
Yeah, you're not thinking about it until it happens, but then that's already too late. And the biggest lesson you can always learn is that yes, you can fake your controls, you can fake everything, you can write all this ChatGPT, but when things happen, and they do happen if you don't have proper controls in place, you have to answer to people of why this happened, and like it better not be, oh, I just wrote this ChatGPT, because that's illegal, I think.
Yes, it should be. Yeah, that's negligent. Yeah.
Yeah, that's negligence. Exactly. So that's what must stay human. We have to realize why we are doing things. And we are
Yes.
not doing things because we just have to do them. We do things because we want to stay safe, protected, and live in a good society. So is there anything else you want to leave people that are listening with? Anything that you've learned or anything that has helped shape your vision of this world and maybe your vision for new agentic things where agents can work alongside humans or anything like that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. The way you phrase that. I've been I started a company. I've had a lot of employees over the years. That gives you a different perspective on agents, I think. When you have people you can call up at any time during the day and say, look, I'm looking at this thing and I really need it structured differently. I don't have 3 hours right now. You do because you work for me and I pay you to do that. Um, you know, and it's and when it works, it's great. When it works, it's great. And they benefit too. They're like, hey, I did it. I did it right. You're pleased with it, but it's not day to day. It's not something everyone does. Like you just indicated, we do a thing, we lose the plot on why we do a thing. We all become like Sisyphus, right? We're all Sisyphus. We're like, okay, it's at the top. It's going to roll down again now. And I have to go down and put it back up the top again. And there's no reason. We're not thinking, oh, I'm in Hades. I did some things on Earth that were bad. So I have to do this over and over again. Um, we're not thinking like that. But in truth, there is meaning. There is meaning to what we do, and there is meaning when we do it with each other. Um, and I see agents as an opportunity, really, if we can get them there to expand our capability to do the things we do faster. And for me, the reason to do something more efficiently isn't to eliminate. And this is the thing that drives me crazy in our civilization right now. It's to eliminate the people who did that thing. I'm like, no, no, no. We're all bogged down in detail, which leaves us strategically challenged. Okay. So like if you want to pretend like there's no strategy, there's no objective, there's no existential rhyme or reason for anything, then yes, let's just replace everyone. Now, just get it over with and get on a free universal income and just meet each other in Fiji. Okay? Cool, man. Great. But, in truth, we're doing this so that we can be more strategic and we can add to our increase, to use an old Yankee phrase, and to just have a better life. So to me, your last question is really, that is it. You nailed it right there.
So, everyone, this is Padraic from CyberSaint. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Yeah, pleasure, Philippe. And thanks everyone for joining, and till we meet next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.